Hello, this is Easy Publish Show, episode 23, chunky content. Let's see what that means in a few minutes. I have a very special guest today. It's a very well-known content strategist, Karen McGrain, but I will leave it to her to introduce herself.
So hi. Thank you for having me on the show. So I'm Karen McGrain. I am the author of Content Strategy for Mobile and an advocate for what I like to call adaptive content, which means having content that's structured in a way that's more flexible and fluid and that helps support primarily getting content on different platforms, but also supports contextual targeting of information.
Great, thanks. And I have, we have this, very known star in the show, so we need to, I needed to get some help from my colleague, Igor, who is also very in line with the topic. So Igor, say a few words.
Yeah, about me, about less famous guest of yours. Okay, so I'm Igor, I'm co-founder of NetGen with Ivo and a couple of other guys, and have been working with web for now 12 years or more. With Easy Publish, of course, for the last 10 years or something, and for some time following the works of Karen, and of course we have her book here, so it's always close. Yeah, and I'm very interesting to hear her say and to actually introduce you to her to Easy Publish, because I think it's very much in sync with the stuff that she writes.
Okay, great. And I am Ivo. I'm also a co-founder of NetGen, and I'm running this show. I don't know, I think it's about 10 or 11th show I have hosted. And it's, of course, it's about Easy Publish, but we sometimes have a bit broader content management and content strategy and content governance kind of topics, and this is one of it. So briefly about the topic, why chunky content? Most of the time we actually try to, when we build sites, we try to break the content into chunks, and that's very brief and very simple explanation. And because of our technical background and because we use Easy Publish, which offers a lot of features to breaking content into chunks, this is kind of familiar to us, and it goes very in line with what, for example, in Karen's book, what you can read there. But it would be much better if Karen could explain from a content strategist point of view, why is why is breaking content into chunks very important today when we have multi-channel and multi-everything kind of web presence or whatever. Karen, can you try to explain this, please?
Sure. So I often describe it as that we're fighting a war between blobs and chunks. So blobs are these like messy, formatting dependent, almost like, imagine like your standard WordPress body field where there's no structure in the content, you just dump everything in the kitchen sink into that one big blob, and it renders on a web page, on a desktop web page, but when you want to do anything else with that content, you can't do anything with it because you can't target the information in that one big field. Like when wikis became the popular way to publish to the web, everybody went wiki crazy. Like all of those are just blobs, and so if you wanted to go back in and say, oh, but what's the location in here, or what's the name of this person, or anything that might be thought of as a little bit more data-like, you couldn't do it. So when I talk about chunks, what I mean is that we need, not just CMS developers, not just content strategists like me, but the client, everybody who's responsible for the website needs to understand why we want to break down information into smaller, more targetable, more addressable pieces. And the main reason for doing that is that you can do more with it. So I have one client right now that's a big hotel chain, and they have an extremely blob-based content management model. And so there's things like say, the directions to the hotel or the information about the parking garage. Like that information lives in multiple places on a given hotel website. So maybe there's like the main page with the parking information, but then on the wedding pages or on the meetings and event pages, they also have information about how much parking costs. All of that stuff is attached to a particular page, so it's duplicated. It means that rather than treating that like it's a piece of data that is stored in one place and then appears in multiple places, they have literally cut and pasted that block of copy 3 separate times. And so that's harder to maintain, it's inaccurate, it takes more time, and that's a simple example, but those are the types of problems that we're trying to solve on the web. And as we move to mobile and we have content that appears in a variety of different platforms, we need content modeling, or we need chunks of content even more, because that's what's going to save us from having lots and lots of duplicated content that we can't do anything with.
Yeah, that's well, this is an Easy Publish show again, so probably most of the Easy Publish community is watching this.
I hope everybody's nodding along, going, yeah, we totally.
Exactly. I mean, they are probably very familiar with it, because it's something that Easy Publish as a content management system is, let's say, is offering these features to you from its core. So from a static point of view, when you think about content chunks in Easy Publish, we would say it's defining content types. So Igor, can you explain just quickly how this relates to Easy?
You mean the static chunks that you were mentioning before?
Content types, basically.
Yeah, but actually this is something that, as Ivo said, for everybody who is from Easy Publish community here listening this, we are all nodding along, because it is actually the way you do an Easy Publish site. You create the model by using classes or types as they're called now, and then you are developing templates and visual representation of such, and all the things that you mentioned before, and they were written in your book also, are very, very in line with the way the usual Easy Publish developer thinks about the development of a site. For example, there is no such thing as a page in Easy Publish CMS. You can have a page, but only if you are describing a book or a leaflet or something, because then you are describing a page. There is no sense of having a page when you're describing a hotel or whatever. So it's actually very much in line with how things are done in Easy. And then, of course, you can do it in many other, I suppose, CMSs, but the thing with Easy is, because it's so ingrained in the core of the CMS, it actually pulls you the way to do it that way. Because, for example, you can develop your own custom, I suppose, types in any CMS, but it's always some kind of creating additional data tables, and you have a lot of development work to do it. In Easy Publish, actually, it's done through the administration interface. Of course, later on you have to develop the templates, but actually the client, maybe more educated client, can itself create and change the way what content the classes have in it. So it's kind of a very natural way of thinking from perspective of information architecture or stuff like that. So I think that all Easy. I think actually the Easy Publish is a kind of undiscovered gem in this sense, because it had all these things way before. And nobody maybe needed them, or people did not need them as much as today. And now we are working actually, and every guys, especially in the community, are working on, let's say, telling the other communities like content strategy communities that actually there is a CMS which is always had these features inbuilt, and actually built the whole thing around them. Yeah.
So I would, this is something that we already have. But there's always some improvement possibilities. So this is that's why I said it. I called it a static content chunks, because you define it in a development phase. But what about chunks that are actually created while entering the content? The editor wants to build maybe a more complex page and he wants to break it into more chunks because it will be better displayed on a mobile, etc., etc. And there are some consideration currently in Easy Systems to build such a support. Karen, did you see those kind of interfaces where you actually when you have a dynamic kind of way of creating content chunks.
Yeah, I think I often describe it as there's really two different types of problems that we're dealing with. So one of them is situations where a lot of the content, or you know, majority, a substantial amount of the content, really, you might even think of it as being more like data than it is like content. So you have things that can be fielded out because it's like, well, that's a phone number, or those are the driving directions, or this is something where it makes a lot of sense to model it because we know we can very easily go, yes, this is what this is. That is a lot harder to do in scenarios where the content is a more narrative flow, where it is inherently not structured content, where, for example, you would have a long body field, and what would go in that body field would change or vary over time. And I think what's compelling there is to be able to, first of all, identify if, even though there may be a longer narrative flow, if there are pieces that need to be transcluded into that flow that are themselves structured content. So, for example, I do a lot of work with publishers, and publishers, you guys have maybe seen the big New York Times thing that came out a couple of years called Snowfall. Mm-hmm. So the idea, that became the buzzword in the whole publishing industry, like, how do we have a snowfall? How do we make snowfall? And for the New York Times, when they did that, that was a huge development effort. I mean, they custom built that. And what a lot of the publishers have talked about is like, well, how can we build a snowfall machine? Like, how can we make it possible to have large-scale images and videos and explainers fit properly into the narrative flow of our stories? Or similarly, I have done a fair amount of work with the Federal Reserve Bank, which is the U.S. central bank. So when you look at how those banks are like the World Bank, how do they publish? Well, they make PDFs. Why do they make PDFs? Well, it's because they need the ability to make this huge, long narrative flow that has things like charts or graphs or equations or large tables embedded in the flow. Mm-hmm. And so what I think is interesting is the idea that even when you have a long narrative running flow in a body, that you are able to take something that is a separate content type and include it inside that body. That, I think, would solve a lot of problems for organizations today that are reliant on custom development or are reliant on PDFs in order to publish.
Yeah, I mean, that's something very in line with the story about the WYSIWYG, right?
Yes.
Which is actually false. Lots of CMSs pretend that, or give false impressions to the editor that it is a WYSIWYG thing. It's like Word, but it's actually, of course, not, because it renders differently on different resolutions, and et cetera, right?
Yeah, it's such a lie. I mean, I joke about it, but I'm like, WYSIWYG, the entire concept of it was derived from the desktop publishing era. I mean, it was derived from processes that you would then use to print something out on the laser printer next to your desk. And we are reliant on that antiquated mental model from 40 years ago to communicate to people what it means to publish on the web. And the web is nothing like a laser printer. Like, the web doesn't work that way. And yet, we have it in our head that that is the only thing that means easy to use. And it's not. In fact, it's harder to use because it's a flawed mental model.
Yeah, I mean, we have a lot of experience with that, because not just from a, for example, a responsive point of view, we also have, for example, ability to build a simple mobile application that actually uses the content from the EZ database, which is perfectly in line with what you're saying. So Igor might say a few words about that.
I see so many organizations that have gone out to the marketplace to ask, well, what's our mobile CMS going to be? Like, what CMS are we going to use to publish to our mobile app? And I'm like, whoa, this way lies madness. Like, you can't have separate publishing systems for every single platform you have out there. What's next? Your Google Glass CMS? Your Watch CMS? That's crazy. what you want is one integrated system that lets you have content that is structured appropriately, that is stored at the appropriate level of granularity, and then you can publish that out to whatever platform you need to get it onto. And you shouldn't be thinking, like, this is our web content and this is our app content. Like, you just have content.
Yeah. I mean, Igor, there is this acronym currently very well, let's say, modern to mention the create once, publish ever, or something like that, right?
Right. Yeah, that came from NPR, so America's National Public Radio. Yeah. And they created a system that allowed them to have content that was structured, so stored at, they had alternate forms of content, so multiple versions of a summary, or in situations where they had like body text of an article, but then also had an audio file for the recording. So all of that was treated as one package, and then whether they sent that to the web or to a player or to an app or even to something like a native platform like your desktop application of iTunes, it was all being published from that one central content repository.
Yeah. But, also, going back to the thing with the unstructured, structured content, the thing where you have like a flow of things that you want just to write out a big, let's say, article. I also, when you were mentioning that, I suppose a lot of people in Easy community again were nodding with that heads, because actually in Easy Publish, when you put a picture, for example, inside of a text, of a rich text, let's call it rich text, it's actually an object which is addressable to like a separate object. So right. where you're standing. And of course there is a wide range of use cases for this. For example, what good is a long, let's say, text if you are outputting with, for example, embedded video, if you're outputting to, I don't know, image, let's say, or on some big screen or whatever, which doesn't support video. So in Easy Publish, you can easily use that video object and just export an image from it and then show it like an image with the preview, maybe a URL underneath in which you can see the video itself. So again, in Easy Publish, these things are very much aligned, and you have all the content is actually embedding from one place to another. So you don't have like an image tag in rich text. You have an object in embed which actually puts an image or a gallery or whatever inside of a longer rich text, for example. And this is something that is actually, I was on some conferences, and I hear people, especially from the press, from the media section, they were talking about this problem of how do you create such articles, like, for example, like Snowfall and similar, and how do you output that content then to the mobile apps and everything. So you can go that way if you have a system like Easy Publish, which can actually change the way the content is presented to multiple channels, and the baseline is that it must not be stored as HTML. Actually, Easy stores it as XML, and then you can transform it any way you like. Yeah, exactly. That's the main thing.
I think that idea of that transformation step is just crucial to how we should be thinking about web publishing, that things aren't stored as HTML. They are stored as, they're stored as some underlying data, and then there's a transformation layer that controls how that gets rendered in a particular platform. And I think that, especially as the work I've been doing with responsive design, there's a huge movement sort of in the front-end design and development community toward design patterns or front-end style guides or a pattern library of different visual styles that can be reused across screens or across platforms. And in my mind, that fits really nicely together with this idea of componentized content, so that if you are thinking of your content management system as managing components of content, managing modules of content, rather than managing pages, and your content needs to be modularized and structured, and then design systems, design patterns can be applied to those components. That is inherently so much more flexible than managing pages of HTML, and it gives you so much more power regardless of the platform you want to go to. If you want to send that to an app, it's easier. If you want a responsive design, those components are inherently responsive within a flexible grid. And so I guess it's like, I feel like the web industry has been talking about the death of the page for a long time, but we really need to drive it home that the death of the page is something that happens throughout the entire architecture of the system.
Yeah, I mean, we can agree with you, but the problem remains that, you know, it's much simpler to just have a WordPress and publish things from a simple form with a one rich text editor or whatever.
Yep. Yep.
It's much simpler. And my worry is,
I have a WordPress blog where I managed everything as like a blog because, you know, I'm like, I get it. I don't have that much stuff, and it's easier for me to just dump it all in one field. I get it.
But that's, I mean, that's in this use case. You know, blog is let's say, well, WordPress was a main blog and still is a main blogger tool. And in this use case, you can get away with it.
Right.
But the problem is when you start thinking about all these features, then the editorial experience, you know, in a let's say in a CMS doesn't have to be easy. In any CMS, it gets complicated, or it can get complicated. So what do you think about the editorial experience in the near future for CMSs? In what direction to go? You know, how to enable these management of these content and content chunks in a easier way?
So I think I guess the way I would describe it is, I think that many organizations, especially larger enterprise organizations, need to fully embrace decoupled publishing, modularized publishing. They need to accept that that they're not managing web pages, that their content creators aren't laying things out on a web page, that there needs to be a separation of the underlying modularized content from the presentation layer. And that, I think, means a huge shift in the way that people think about how they create content. I believe that even for smaller organizations, though, that there's going to be an increasing recognition and embracing of the idea that having a blob of content in a WordPress-style interface just isn't the way to go. I will give a little shout out. I have a podcast with Ethan Marcotte on responsive web design. So it's responsivewebdesign.com/podcast. Yesterday we released an interview with a publisher called Lapham's Quarterly. And Lapham's is this historical archive. It's this, they describe themselves as like a museum of content. And they've had a website since 2008. And they just relaunched this beautiful new responsive redesign. But what their editor talked us through was how much additional work they have to do to go in and add the structure that they needed, that they hadn't added at the beginning. And now they've got to go back through all of their old issues, all of their archives, and add in the appropriate structure to make sure that things like images or videos, as we've been talking about here, are appropriately embedded, to make sure that the names of contributors or other metadata like that is appropriately tagged. And that stuff takes time and effort. Like that's, or I guess the way to put it is, that type of work is not that complicated if you do it up front and you just kind of do it during production. But if you wait until later, and you have to go back through and retroactively try to structure that data, it is a huge pain. And it takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of money. And so I think that's, in my mind, it's all of us working in the web community sort of standing up, continuing to stand up for the idea that this effort, having fields, having structure, having modules of content is necessary. And it's what's going to be necessary for surviving the future.
So it basically means that it has to be a bit more complicated. It cannot be just very simple user interface. You need to, as an editor, you need to know what are you doing. Why are these 3 fields of title and not just one? Because one is the shortest version for the mobile, etc., etc. Right?
Right. Yeah, I'm sympathetic to editors in that I think over the last decade or so we've been building the content management framework. We've been getting content management systems to a point where they do all the things they need to do. But in a lot of cases, those tools have not been particularly usable. I mean, it's just been this crazy thicket of fields and a really complex, confusing workflow. And I think now we have a lot of tools that basically do what they need to do. or I think most of the tools out there, Easy Publish can do really the core of everything somebody needs. And so now the focus really needs to be on the usability of those interfaces. It needs to be on how well that workflow maps to the user's mental model. It needs to be on, how those screens are designed to make sure that the important information is up front and highlighted, and things that are less important are, put lower on the screen or somewhat hidden. And that stuff, that's just user experience 101. I mean, that is like the fundamentals of usability and design. And I just think it's time that we put those thoughts to those internal content management interfaces, not just the front end of the website.
I hope that Easy is now finally getting to a point to release. I hope this year or before summer the new editorial interface, because the old one is, well, it's got some age. It's a teenager, so it needs to be replaced.
Getting a little awkward.
Yeah, I really hope that they will get it right, and we will, of course, also help them into that. We have also some things in preparing for this kind of stuff. One of the things, and Igor can explain it a bit, it's about layout management. That we think that it should be less difficult to build not just the content in a way of let's say fields and stuff like that, but also building layouts with blocks and of blocks of content and blocks of features in a less complicated way. Maybe Igor can explain a bit.
Yeah, it's the same thing with Easy a lot of times, that a lot of those features, for example, for creating complex layouts which could then be inserted in some kind of responsive grid. I'm talking more about the layouts of, let's say, front pages or landing pages, not the articles themselves. So from some kind of a container pages which would have a bits of content from other places of the web. Easy had for some time a solution for it, but what are we actually trying to do now, and what are we thinking about, is creating exactly what Karen said, interface which could be used for an uneducated, I would say uneducated, not a developer editor, but a simple editor to create such interfaces. And it really is an effort. There are a couple of interfaces that we found very similar. For example, the one that MailChimp uses, or usually these email companies like MailChimp, they have like an editor for creating responsive emails and stuff like that, and they are kind of handling the same thing, because they have a drag and drop interface which you can then again not put like content itself, but modules. For example, fetch me latest 4 items for some subsection of site and put it here, and this then will be responsively managed with some kind of a framework or whatever. So there is a lot of work to put in there, but I think then, again, I'm bragging with Easy all the time, they have the inner workings. Then they need just this output, the final touch, so not only us, which are the developers, and we are using Easy every day, 8 hours per day for the last 10 years, but also editors which are working with it on their sites could use with these. Yeah. So I think that I know that Easy is also, Easy Systems, the company which is pushing the main development of Easy Publish, is also working in this direction. And of course, I think that there is a place for multiple such interfaces, and editors are really in need for such stuff, because the responsive movement, everything, it brought so much work to them. Because now they don't just put a little, couple of text and just see it on their screens. They have to resize the screens. They have to see if it works on multiple screen sizes. So we really need to help those people. I agree with you there, Karen.
Yeah, I think we need, this what you said, just to make that's kind of an issue. It's very difficult to make something which is easy to use and which is underlying, complex.
Yeah.
Well, I would
Apple
like.
does it.
Yes. Sorry. Say.
Apple does it.
Apple does it. Yeah. Well, Apple doesn't work always. So
yeah.
So I want to keep this not too long. Any last questions for Karen? Igor, do you have some question?
I have a lot of questions, but I think our time ran out. So maybe on mail or something. Yeah.
Okay. From my side, maybe a last question is what do you think about well, actually, it's about not about custom CMSs, because that's very, let's say, I would say in 2015 that's a very rare occasion. Why would you build a custom CMS? But more about the differences between a generic CMS like Easy or Drupal or whatever, and a vertical-based CMS. So it's a CMS for a certain niche. Do you have, in your experience, did you come across such CMSs?
Sure. I think the difference is marketing, basically. I mean, I think that in those sorts of industry vertical-focused content management systems, they are trying to define content types up front, or trying to define publishing processes up front. And I would say, I can see a world for very simple tools that might be designed to, say, update your restaurant website or a wedding website, like if you're a couple and you want to put up a wedding blog, basically, or maybe something simple that's aimed at, like, doctors or dentists. Your dentist needs a website, but the website isn't that big of a deal. They just need a little brochure. So I can see a world where simple tools exist for very repeatable styles of websites, where you don't need to go in and reinvent the wheel every time. That is not the problem that I think 95% of the world faces. I think that for most businesses, it's like the problem isn't getting 80% of the way there. The problem is getting the other 20% of the way. And having a package where someone claims that they've figured that all out for you, it doesn't work. Because, it's going to get you 80% of the way there, but it's the other 20% where you need to sit down and say, how does our business work? What makes our business different? How are our content types not like, the standard? And to ignore that work, or to think that you can just buy a package that's going to solve all those problems for you, I think ignores the core of what you need to be doing.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing with vertical, kind of like you said, they have these pre-packaged content types and predefined content chunks for that niche, and then you go with this as like you said, in a marketing way, as you say, we have this sold for this niche. But in a more broader sense, it might work in a way that you have a generic CMS with, like I said, predefined content types, but then you need to be able to customize it for the client in the end, right?
Yeah. I mean, how hard is it to make a content type? I mean, that's seriously. I'm sure in Easy Publish you could sit down and make that in like 20 minutes. So, or if that, I could make it in 2 minutes. So that's not the problem.
Yeah, but what Ivo is, I agree with him, and we were thinking about in that direction, is having, as he said, a generic CMS in Easy Publish in our case, and then go that 80% of the way out of the box, but always leave a lot of time for that extra 20%, which makes the difference actually. And also, like you mentioned before, we are thinking about approaching, let's say, small entities, because, for example, in the media section, you can always go, for example, with the New York Times or some businesses like that, which have all the money and all the time that need to be put into this CMS. But what if you are talking about a small newspaper in a small town which has only a limited budget? Then maybe that 80% is enough, or maybe just they need just 5% more, not 20 more. So we are kind of looking in that direction, and it's yeah, but it's always, you have to have this customization. part, because actually just clicking out, for example, a new site, I don't think it would be feasible to do. I just don't think it's feasible.
Yeah. Any last words, Karen?
Thank you both for talking to me today. I think this has been a lot of fun. This is obviously something I love to talk about, so I hope to have a chance to talk more with you in the future.
Thanks for you two to joining us, and I hope this hangout will be useful for someone, maybe to educate some clients about chunky content. I don't know. Okay, thanks. That was it. 37 minutes. A bit more. I know that we could talk a lot more, but we need to make a line somewhere. Just to say that, or just to invite everybody to the second revision event in Boston. I think you will be there, right?
I will indeed. Looking forward to it.
That should be beginning of March, I think 5th or something like that, March, but you can learn about it on the Easy Systems page, easy.no. That was all for it. Thanks all, and see you at the next episode. Bye.